Hello, everyone. This is Z. Welcome to Unlocking Greatness Podcast with Zenja Glass. I am so beyond excited to bring to you not only a dear friend of mine, but a woman who has so helped me in my life and has so helped, I would say at this point, thousands of people all over the world. She's an amazing author. She's also a life coach now. Oh my goodness. And if you only knew her story and what she's been through and how far she's come, her name is Olivia Hudson. Hi, Olivia. Oh my God, I'm so glad to have you. Olivia is the author of this amazing book called Caring for the Child Within. And I'm going to put up a link in the show notes later so you all have a link to be able to access the book or any other services or what have you she has to offer. I do want to start by saying this. Olivia is not paid to be on the show. I didn't pay her to come on the show. This is not about a money-making thing. This is about, I've asked God to show me who are some people in my life that's tremendously impacted me, and who are some people that are doing some big things out there in the world that are helping women all over the world. And I can't say enough good things about Olivia. Now, Olivia won't brag on herself, so I have to say this. This lady has been everywhere. Olivia has been asked to speak and host events and workshops and seminars all over. I'm talking Mexico. She's been Panama, Guatemala, Peru, Honduras, Belize. I'm sure I'm forgetting some places, and all over the United States. Like, she travels like you wouldn't believe when needed to be the keynote speaker at events. And I just love you. Welcome, Olivia. Can you hear me, Olivia?
Yes, I can.
Welcome, welcome. So can you tell us just a little bit about your story, Olivia, in terms of how did you move here from Panama, or maybe even why did you move here? And a little bit about just a backdrop in terms of who you are, what you've experienced, and what led you to writing such an amazing book, Caring for the Child Within.
Yes, thank you, Z. I moved here from Panama with one goal, okay? And that goal was to better my life. But I grew up in a household where, sadly, my dad was very abusive to my mother. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I talk about publicly. In fact, I had to get my mother's permission.
Yes, of course.
Before I even published the book.
Yes.
She had to be okay. And her heart is like, you know what, if it will help other women to not
Amen.
make the same mistake, go for it. So I grew up in a very, very abusive household, so a lot of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. So my mom really wanted to give us a better life. Mm-hmm. My mom did a lot of stuff in the background as far as getting a visa and all of that, and I was able to move to the United States. Obviously, being in the United States is tricky because I am there on a visa, but technically I couldn't work. Mm-hmm. I couldn't really go to school because I didn't have legal papers. And during that process, I decided, okay, I really wanted to fall in love. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up falling in love and giving my heart. Only to find out that one of the guys that I fell in love with was married. Mm. And when I asked him, I still remember this, like I said, hey, why did you not tell me you were married? Uh-huh. His response were, I never asked.
He said you never asked him. Okay.
So.
And you're only about 19 or 20 at that 19, time, right?
Yeah, 19 at this point. So I thought this is an American thing. Mm. You need to ask men if they are married because they are not just going to volunteer this information to you. And so fast forward a couple years later, I meet my husband and he will tell you those were the questions I asked him.
One of the first things, are you married? I know that's
like,
right.
Ain't nobody ever asked me that question. I was like, I just thought, this is kind of what you do. And so I wasn't going to find myself in that same place again.
Right.
And so I met my husband. It was amazing. He really, really, really won my heart. And but I had been so heartbroken, honestly, by by what I saw growing up, by being hurt from this guy, that I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to try to be in love. Like literally, I'm just going to be a good wife. So I married my husband, and in the first 3 years of marriage, he was such a gentleman, an amazing gentleman. What was interesting is that I always felt that he was either going to cheat on me or get somebody pregnant or leave me. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but it's the fact. I was going to be okay with all of those things. Because the only thing that I wasn't going to tolerate in a man was that he put his hand and abused me physically.
And everything else was okay.
Everything else was okay.
Okay.
So when he wasn't doing any of those other things, what did that create in me? Insecurity.
Come on, Olivia.
And then I started thinking, wait a minute. Okay. So what I saw growing up,
yes,
is not necessarily the measure for every man. And so I began to allow myself to give my heart to my husband, fell in love with my husband. And it was just a beautiful thing. However, the more I gave my heart to him, the more I found myself crying at night.
What led to the crying at night? What was that all about?
I began to grieve what I didn't have growing up.
Wow. That's very deep. I hope you all just heard what Olivia said. She said that she began to cry and go through a lot at night because she was grieving what did you say, what you did not have growing up?
What I did not have growing up.
Keep talking to us. And what did that lead to?
And as I grieved that, the reason why that came out is as I saw how he treated our boys and how he treated me as a wife in a sense. And so that really ended up leading to me just being really unhappy with myself. Because now I began to believe a new lie, which was he's doing it because he has to. So I just couldn't accept the love. Wow. It was like there's nothing in me will accept that there was 100% pure love there.
That's pretty deep, Olivia.
And so eventually I began to develop panic attacks. And I'm telling you, just like you and I are having a conversation right now.
Yeah.
I'm having a conversation with somebody and all of a sudden everything around me starts spinning. Like I just completely lose balance. And I'm sitting there trying to figure out to keep myself balanced, but nothing works. Eventually I will lay down and I ended up booking an appointment with the doctors because I'm like, I can't live like this. My husband being in the military, he will travel different places. And so we are in different states. I'm like, man, I can't live like this. So ended up going to several doctors, got all kinds of tests. I'm talking, they give me a balance test where they put something in your ear, makes you dizzy, all of that. And the doctor comes back and says, so here's the thing. I've never met anyone that is as healthy as you.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. I began to believe, I think I have a tumor that nobody can see. And one day it's just going to take me out. Because there was no explanation. So because that was the answer of the doctor, I then began to come up with ways to deal with it. So my husband and I began to develop kind of like what to do with the warning signs. I started picking up on the warning signs. So it's almost like when a woman is about to go into labor, you're like, oh, it's coming. That's what I would do. I would say, oh, it's coming. He's like, okay, breathe. I mean, like we came up with a whole system.
Yeah.
So sort of had it under control. Wasn't that it was gone. I think it was just control. So years passed and I literally sort of lived with these things. I did not know there were panic attacks. The doctor had not been able to say what it was. He just pretty much said, live with it kind of thing. So you can do. And eventually, about 3 years into our marriage, we had the privilege of getting help in our marriage.
Okay.
Meaning we definitely, the Bible was open with us. We studied the Bible. And as I studied the Bible, it was like there was a world that I didn't even know existed. And I still remember reading the scripture in Jeremiah 29.
Verse 11.
11.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I'm doing a podcast on that one, I think after this episode, but go ahead, Olivia.
Wow. He said, for I know the plans I have for you.
Declares the Lord.
Declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. You will call on me and I will listen to you if you call with all your heart. And I remember thinking this, and I'm sure I'm butchering the scripture there, but for the first time, I was like, oh, someone has plans for me similar to the ones little Olivia had. That's all I saw. And so I decided at that time in my life that I was going to go ahead and give my heart to this God. Now, mind you, I grew up going to church and all of that, but to this God that had plans for me. Sadly, I didn't have the emotional connection. It was all intellectual. It's like I read the scriptures and it's like, okay, follow. But I will continue to pray, God, I want to emotionally connect. And one of the biggest things when I studied the Bible and as I continue to study that I realized God was asking me to do was, in order for you to move forward, you need to forgive. And as I made an intellectual decision to forgive, and you ask, you guys don't know me, your audience doesn't know me. So who was the primary person I needed to work on forgiving was my dad. Just a lot of pain there. And so I intellectually chose to forgive my dad, but prayed for years to emotionally do so.
Wow.
I intellectually chose to give my heart to God, but for years prayed to emotionally connect with him.
That's pretty strong what you're saying, because wow, you kind of got me thinking. I didn't know that there was a big difference between intellectually forgiving someone and emotionally. Can you walk us through? You mentioned about little Olivia, which I'm so looking for you to get to that part about that exercise someone had you do. Can you kind of walk through a little bit for the audience? How did you get to that point of even being able to do that? And what kind of exercises or help did you get to, I don't want to give it away because I want you to talk about in your book when you talked about little Olivia. Can you touch on that a little bit and sort of bring the audience up to par in terms of how you got to that point?
Yes, I think eventually it became very, very clear that I needed help. And it was really through a conversation with a friend. She pointed out, she's like, I think you're having panic attacks. I remember Googling this whole thing and realizing, yes, I'm having panic attacks. And it said I needed to go see a therapist.
Okay.
So when I went to see the therapist, they did all the diagnosis as far as questions. They asked me a lot of questions, and he confirmed. He said, you are having panic attacks. What's happening with you is that they are happening after a major event happens. So I had developed a resilience to pain, in a sense.
Wow.
So when the pain was gone, my body would just go crazy.
Okay.
Just flip out to the point that it would land me in the hospital. And so that began my journey of caring for the child within.
Wow.
I went through therapy after therapy, because one thing that the doctor, the counselor told me at that time, he said, something in your past, there's some trauma that's been activated that's leading to these panic attacks. So in order to deal with it, you have to get through, you have to get and figure out what's the trauma. And I remember the very first time I went into like a therapy. Again, remember, we moved around. So I've had therapists in different places that we moved around. And the therapist asked me to tell her about me. And I'm telling her, she looks at me and she goes, you do realize that you have just told me a very difficult, very sad, just a lot of traumatic things. And you've shared those with me as if you are talking about someone else's life.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, okay. And I just like walked away. Eventually, just to kind of speed up, I really, it's just so much. But the one thing that I remember is this one particular therapist. And she sits me down because she's trying to figure out, how do I get this girl? Because they clearly could see there's some deep issues. And she does this exercise with me about sitting down and envisioning myself as a little girl.
Well, talk about that, because when I read that in your book, first of all, I remember, I believe when you were going through that point, you called and we had a talk about that. And I was like, oh my goodness, that sounds so good. What did she do? And so to read it in your book, I literally have chills on my arms when I thought about what she had you do. But can you share with the audience? And I do want to say this really quickly for those who are listening to the podcast. First of all, I guess I do need to say this. We're not mental experts. I don't even know if that's the proper way of saying it, but we're not experts in terms of how you need to deal with what you're dealing with in terms of anxiety or depression or what have you. This is simply a story from Olivia Hudson, who has been through, absolutely, and who's come out on the other side to the point where she's, being asked to speak all over the world at this point to help other women. So please keep in mind, this is her story and the advice that was given to her. If you're going through any anxiety, depression, or whatever it is, I strongly advise for you to seek out a professional and to get the help that you need. I want to paraphrase with that. So can you touch a little bit on the exercise she had you do and what became of that, Olivia?
Yes. And actually, before I do that, Zenja, I would like to piggyback on something that you said, because the whole purpose of my book really is to help others, or to at least give the opportunity for others to see someone's journey and that it is possible to heal. There are so many books out there.
Yeah.
And I have read many, many of them. But for me, my book, that's why it's called Caring for the Child Within, my journey of emotional healing. Because one of the things that I wish I had was someone that was on the other side.
Come on.
Would have kind of told me all the dirt, in a sense, process of it.
Yes.
That is the one reason, another reason of why I published that book.
I appreciate you saying that, Olivia. That makes a lot of sense. This is your journey, and you're just trying to encourage others who are going through theirs. I love that. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. And so she did this exercise with me where she basically asked me to envision myself as a little girl. Now, this was very, very difficult. I literally could only remember my childhood 16 years up and up.
16 and up, that's all you could remember? Come on.
So she worked really hard to pull those memories. And some of them was from pictures that I have. I don't have a lot of pictures of my childhood, very, maybe like 3 or 4. So some of them was from pictures. So she worked really, really hard to help me pull these memories. And then she had me envision myself as this little girl sitting in the seat.
I remember you told me that.
Because the amazing thing about that is because it's almost like, it felt like a drawing. Like, oh, all of a sudden she had clothes. All of a sudden she had hair. And I then could see her like I'm seeing you.
Yeah.
And I remember the therapist asked me at that moment. And I think looking out now, she probably saw this was the perfect time to ask me this question, because I was just shocked that my memory don't work that way. And so she said, if you could tell little Olivia one thing,
you know, I'm about to cry.
What will you say to her?
Let me repeat that, because I interrupted you and I apologize. So she said to you, if you can tell little Olivia one thing, what would you say? Now that you visioned yourself as a child sitting in front of yourself.
Yes. And in my vision, I'm about 9 or 10.
Okay.
I didn't even hesitate. I said, we made it. That's what I said. I said, we made it. But the way, so a little something here is the way I'm saying we made it now was very different than how I said it when I said it to that therapist over 20 years ago. I said, we made it like this. We made it. There was no joy. It was really like, man, guys, I was wandering there for a while.
Yeah.
And so that therapist began to take me on a journey of talking about what we made it from. And that's what began my journey. And in that journey, I was able to really recognize and see just the ways God had protected me.
Yeah.
And helped me, like walk with me. And eventually that was so revolutionary that continued more years of therapy. I was still sort of stubborn because I remember there was one therapy session where, again, the whole concept of forgiving my father needed to came out. And I remember the therapist said, okay, so here's the thing. What if your father never asks you for forgiveness?
Oh, that's deep. What if he never asked for forgiveness? Come on.
And at this point, I'm like spiritual woman, I'm like, oh yeah, no. I read my Bible. I go to church. This therapist clearly don't know that my dad will do that. So you know what? I don't think you're going to help me out. And I went ahead and cut the therapy session. I was like, I'm done. I'm not seeing this therapist anymore. I got God. I'm good. So I decided I'm just going to continue being on my own in a sense. But the panic attacks started again. And when they started, they went from bad to worse. It just got worse and worse. And eventually, it was clear I needed to go and deal. So I went back and dealt with that and accepted that if my dad never asked me for forgiveness, me forgiving him wasn't about him.
Wow.
it was for me.
Yes.
And I went and I wrestled things out with God after one of the therapy sessions, and the rest is history. Honestly, I ended up continuing to cure for myself. Years later, I ended up sitting one day on my rocking chair and writing my journey of over 10 years. I mean, honestly, I don't even know what prompted me. I just sort of sat and did that. And then eventually, as my friends were going through hard times, I will give them the writing. And they're like, girl, this is good. You should put this in a book.
I was one of the ones that tell you, you need to write a book. Like, this is amazing what you even helping me with.
Yes. And so eventually I put it on one of my blogs that I had, again, long story how I got to having a blog. And my sister read it. And my sister said, hey, you should make it an audio format, which I haven't, by the way. But her saying, Olivia, this is powerful.
Yes.
Share it led me to eventually pulling out that paper that I wrote for me.
Right. Come on.
And it's now into a book that God has helped so many on their journey.
Yes.
Not
and this is where
not because I give expert advice,
right.
But really is because everybody has a journey and walk through it.
Yes. Yes. This is where I want to intervene a second, because, you know, Olivia, if you just know her, it's never been about money for her or about publicity. And we kind of talk a little bit about this because Olivia likes to baby walk into things. And I'm one that'll just run. Right, Olivia? We balance each other so well. And so she went from, you know, writing this to, you know, being asked to speak. It's just amazing how things have taken off for her and how she's just literally, she has impacted and changed the lives of so many women, not just by her story and by her book, but just about from who she is. And now what I love about you, Olivia, is you are a life coach now, which is absolutely amazing. I know some of my audience members have asked me to get into that, and I'm like, I don't know, but I got a good friend. That's one. But can you tell them just a little bit before we wrap this up, Olivia, about, you know, you being a life coach? And you all, this is not an advertisement. You know, in fact, if you know anything about Olivia, she's the kind of person that's like, don't put my number up, don't put my website, don't do nothing. And I'm like, girl, I'm going to put something in the show notes, whether you like it or not. But I do want to say this. My audience knows me enough to know I would never present someone to them or put someone on this platform that I don't feel or believe has in any way either touched my life or can offer something of value to them. And Olivia, I love you with all my heart. You just, if you all only knew, there's so much more to her story. I just wish we had time to go into it. How she's impacted so many people and helped people. So Olivia, can you tell just a little bit about, you know, you being a life coach and what that entails, what that looks like, if you don't mind talking about that for a quick minute?
Yeah. Here's how I'm going to wrap up the life coaching. I actually have this book. I hope you guys can see it. It's a ring. This is what inspired me to be a life coach. My journey led me to being the speaker for a women workshop in Acapulco, an international women workshop.
Wow.
And this is a photo book that a friend put together for me. After leaving that, I had so many women come up to me and talk that it began to open my heart to pursuing becoming certified as a life coach. Although other people had sort of told me to go and do that,
right? I
just wasn't ready. As Zenja knows, I'm like, baby step. But this, God made it clear. And so I embarked on that journey of becoming a life coach. And I'm telling you, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. You are a natural at it. I've been trying to get you to do that forever.
I know you have.
I know. I've been trying to push her because if you all only knew. So I hope that you all have been inspired by Olivia's story. And those are just tiny bite-sized pieces, just so you know, of her life, what she's been through, her story from, moving from Panama to the United States, her story of having to go back and really care for the child within, through all the therapy sessions and getting deep into your Bible and understanding more about, oh my goodness, I not only have to forgive intellectually, but emotionally as well. And that journey, again, Olivia's not pushing this, but I am. Caring for the Child Within is an amazing book. She even told me before the segment, and yes, I am going to tell on you, Z, you don't even have to put the book up. Like, you don't have to even put an image up. I'm like, girl, be quiet. I'm going to do it. So it's just an amazing story. It really is. And Olivia, the lives you've impacted is unreal. What you guys don't know is part of the reason also why I'm even doing this, why I'm even doing my podcast, is because Olivia is the one who led the way with starting some group on one of her social media pages, a private page. And it grew to the thousands, my goodness, helping women all over the world. And she is the one that kind of nudged at me that, Z, you should start a group. So I actually started with a private Facebook page and it grew just uncontrollably, my goodness. And I was literally following Olivia's lead. You have to know that. Olivia's like, Z, you got a lot to offer people. You need to do this. And so that group got to a point where it was a lot in there that by the grace of God, he moved in my heart is now to start a podcast. So Olivia, I credit some of that to you because you're the one that led the way. So I love you. I love you. I love you. I pray that my audience, that you all have been inspired by Olivia. You can't get more real than this woman. She's just absolutely amazing. She gives her heart. There's so much more to her story. When you read her book, if you decide to get it, you'll find out about. But Olivia, I thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. And I am going to put in the show notes a link to her book. And Olivia, I'm going to force you to give me the link to your website or something in case someone's interested in signing up for the life coaching or what have you. I just want to reiterate, we're not experts in the field in terms of how you should handle anxiety or depression or whatever you're going through. This is simply Olivia's journey that she's chosen to share with you all. And any last minute words, Olivia, before we wrap it up?
Yes, I want to say thank you to you, Zenja. Honestly, part of caring for the child within is having other people invested also in doing that. And I remember all the ways that I did not even know that little Olivia needed caring for, that you have cared for her. Whether it's my husband being out to sea and mailing me a letter every week for 6 months.
You remember that? Her husband's in the military, so he was gone for 6 months. And every week I would mail her a letter and say, girl, you just got 40 more weeks. Girl, you just got 38 more weeks. Hang in there. And every week I had a letter sent to her. You remember that?
Yes. And I just think that this topic of caring for your child within starts with God, continues with God.
Come on.
And he continues to end it as he sees, please. And the people that he puts in there are just exactly what the little person in you needs to flourish and blossom. And you, my friend, have been one of those people. You have called me to get out of my comfort zone. And I really, really appreciate that about you. So Thank you for having me. It's been an honor and a privilege. I'm like, whoa, I cannot believe Zenja has a podcast.
Okay, right. God got my butt on the camera speaking to people. Lord have mercy. I love you, Olivia. I pray that you all have enjoyed this segment. I am going to have in the show notes the links to be able to reach Olivia or to get her book, even though she doesn't want me putting all that in there. I'm going to put it in there. Don't forget, if you're interested in joining my text community platform, that number is in the show notes as well. So you guys can text that number and be an instant part of my platform. And Olivia, I love you. We're going to end the podcast. Bye, you guys. This is Z with Unlocking Greatness Podcast. Bye-bye. Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening. This is Z with Unlocking Greatness Podcast. Please don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and the notification button. Love you all. Bye-bye.